Morning, everyone. Thank you. I, for one, am excited it's raining. That means fall is here and my kids are back in school. So, no, thank you guys for coming out in the rain. And I'm super excited. In July, we kicked off Canvas for Good, and it's awesome to see so many people wearing their yellow T-shirts. And a big piece of that campaign and our mission is around how we support the communities that we're engaged in. And I'm thrilled that we're here kicking off this year's kind of charitable giving, and really excited that we are supporting the Bailey Boucher House. I had a chance to go to Bailey about 2 years ago now and spent a day, and the work that they do with the most vulnerable people in our community, people who are facing homelessness, people who are dealing with disease, and the way that they work with these people with such dignity was just super inspiring. And so when we had the opportunity to partner with them this year for kickoff for our charitable giving, it was an easy yes kind of for me. I really, again, it's when we talked about Canvas for Good, we really thought about kind of business as personal. You guys saw the video that we put together, and we're going to hear some kind of really some anecdotes today and some stories how this is really personal, how the work that's done at Bailey really affects our community in a very personal way. So I'm just super excited and really pleased to welcome Brian Knowles, who's the Executive Director of Bailey Boucher House. He's going to come up here and tell us a little bit more about all the work that they do. So thank you, Brian.
Thanks a lot. Good morning. They told me it was slippery up here, and I have never missed an opportunity to fall whenever there's an opportunity to fall. So if in the middle of this I'm just flat down, go with it. So my name is Brian Knowles. I'm the Executive Director of Bailey Boucher House, and my purpose up here is twofold. First, I just want to thank you for allowing me to be here. Over the past 6-8 months, I have gotten an opportunity to meet many of you, and I have never been so impressed with a company. And Jeremy should be really proud. And I get to actually tell the Bailey Boucher House story to many companies and businesses and corporations. But every single person I have met here or had the opportunity to show around Bailey Boucher House has been the most amazing person. And together, you must make an amazing team. And I want to just come here and hang out. It's really important. I think you know how important it is that the place you work, that you connect with on an emotional level and a spiritual level, and that you develop connections to that family you have there, because otherwise work would suck. So I really commend you, and I want to thank you. I'm so impressed with your company. The second and main reason that I'm here is to tell you a little bit about Bailey Boucher House and what Sanmar and you all are supporting this year. And so I'm going to go over a little bit of history about Bailey Boucher House, because I think the history of how we came to be is so important. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about our work today, because I know that lunch is after this, so you want to get to doing that. But I also want to say that I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. If you want to come up and ask me questions, lots of people in Jennifer and her team has my contact information. I'm more than willing, if you ever want to stop by Bailey Boucher House, just because you're interested, I'm more than willing to show that to you. So that being said, let me tell you a little bit about what we do. So Bailey Boucher House has been open for over 27 years, and its main purpose was to serve people with AIDS at end of life. So in the mid-'80s, what was happening in this region of the country was that King County is considered what's called a second wave county, or Seattle, a second wave city in terms of AIDS. Meaning cities like New York and San Francisco had thousands of cases, but when Seattle only had a handful. But this community, like it's done for almost everything that I've seen, was very forward-thinking and wanted to figure out how to do this work a little better. Because throughout the country, people with AIDS, the stigma around AIDS, the stigma around being gay, the stigma and fear of death and how AIDS might or might not be transmitted made no one want to touch or be near people with AIDS. What was happening here in Seattle in the mid-'80s, as there started to be more cases of people with AIDS, was that they weren't being treated very well here, even in this community that is pretty forward-thinking and liberal. People with AIDS were dying in hospitals because nursing homes, hospices would not take them. And it was often very tragic scenes. So people with AIDS, individuals, mostly men at that time in their 20s or 30s, would find out they would feel healthy one day, and within a week or two, they would be at end of life and would just have several months to live. It was a time, if you can imagine this, where nurses would refuse to care for people with AIDS because of the fear that they had. And that was an okay thing. And so sometimes people with AIDS would be in hospitals at the end of life, and nobody would be caring for them. And nurses would refuse to go into their room. Dietary workers would not bring their trays in. The trays would pile up outside. People's friends, because they weren't legally related to them, would be barred from seeing them. And people would have a very awful end of life. And so a group of people came together. This is the amazing thing. A group of people came together, all volunteers, all people who might have been connected to someone who had AIDS, or just for the social justice issue, wanted to figure out how everyone deserved a better end-of-life experience. They came together to figure out how to create an environment where people with AIDS could die with some dignity, some respect, and some love. And so they visited 40 cities across the country. This was before Google. You couldn't just Google something. You actually had to go and see it. And looking for how other places did it. And what they saw was there was no really best practice way to do it. So this courageous group of volunteers decided that they were going to build a facility from the ground up, something that had never been done anywhere in the world to serve people with AIDS at end of life. This was an amazing thing that this community took on. And the community supported them, and they raised funds to be able to build Bailey Boucher House. And then they sought, because these were volunteers and mostly building developers, they sought a healthcare organization to actually help run it. And what they found was that no healthcare organization would take it on. No one wanted their brand to be attached to AIDS. And so they were almost finished building this amazing facility, and every healthcare organization in town said they wouldn't do it. And that's where Virginia Mason stepped up and said that they would take this on. It was an extreme risk for their brand. It was also extreme risk financially, because we don't have such great finances, which is why you're helping us. And so they took that on, and Bailey Boucher House was opened. Half the people who died of AIDS in King County died at Bailey Boucher House. There is no other organization anywhere in the world that has that kind of connection to the community. In those early days, it was very usual for someone to be there dying of AIDS. Their family, if they were around, their family often found out on the same day that they were gay, they had AIDS, and they were dying. And so they had to deal with the emotion around that. Our main job was to help people make sure that that end-of-life experience was comfortable and that they were surrounded by love, even if they were alone. And so our staff became very supportive in the process of their end-of-life experience. So we were known, and why we were created was for this inpatient facility where people with AIDS died. We also opened an outpatient program that the goal was just to keep people as independent as they possibly could in the last days of life, to keep them at home whenever possible. And at that time, there were no treatments for HIV. It was very much end-of-life disease. It didn't matter whether you were a bank vice president or whether you were a homeless person, you had the same trajectory. And so our outpatient program was really to help people stay as independent as they could. And these were sad times. Half the people we served in our outpatient program were blind because AIDS affected their eyesight. Half of them had dementia. So imagine a 25 or 30-year-old with dementia, so that even if they had people around them who loved them, they could not be at home by themselves because they were not safe. And so they came to us. So the people at end of life, the people on our outpatient program, our goal was to make that experience as joyful as it possibly could. And we did a really great job building community of people who celebrated every day that they were alive. It was really an amazing place. Thankfully, what happened by the end of the 90s is that there was treatment for HIV. And so now, the way I talk about the treatment for HIV is I talk about it in terms of haves and have-nots. If you have a place to live, if you have a history of being successful, of working, if you have people in your life that care for you, then you can succeed on these treatments, which are sometimes very complicated, but you can succeed. And the reason it's complicated is it's important. The treatment, the medications are not things that you can ever stop. Because if you stop taking the treatments, the virus comes back and then replicates itself, and those treatments don't work anymore that you were on. So it becomes really important that you have to be successful in not being able to miss medications and take these medications. But if you have people around you who love you and you have the history of being successful in your life, you can do that. But if you are mentally ill, if you're chemically dependent, if you're homeless, if you're people who don't have great access to health care, people who are poor, people of color, who are ostracized from our health care system many times, you don't succeed, and you then suffer a lot like they did before the treatments were there. And the thing that happens now, so what we know is that we're not as scared, the community's not as scared as much as about HIV/AIDS as they were in the 80s and the 90s. And if people have HIV and they take medications, if they can be successful in doing that, they are actually not contagious. The spread of HIV stops. But if they are not successful, if they do not know they had HIV or they can't take the medications, they spread HIV and they actually end up dying. So it's the communities that have more problems, communities that are homeless, communities of people who are mentally ill and chemically dependent, the spread of HIV continues to grow. And in particular, in our homeless community. So I want to talk a little bit about that, about how we're serving people who are homeless who have HIV. In King County, 10% of the people who are homeless have HIV. That's a really big number. And it's only growing because what happens is those folks either don't know they have HIV or they're not treating their HIV because they have their daily struggles of finding a place to live, of figuring out where their next meal is, of being safe is what they're focused on. And so they are still contagious, and they're in their communities, and HIV is spreading. So what is happening is those communities HIV continues to spread. And so we, through our outpatient program, have been doing concentrated work with the homeless community who has HIV, and being able to help them connect both to medical care and to other social services. So what we found is that if you're homeless and mentally ill and chemically dependent, you might not be able to be convinced that, hey, if you take these medications, you're going to live longer when you're just struggling on what to eat that day. So one of the things that we do is we just make sure there is always food available, a hot breakfast, a hot lunch, a hot dinner, bagels and cereal and toast out all the time, because most people have struggled for a long time just finding food. So by building that trust in someone so that they can stop worrying about food, that was one way into their hearts. We started a homeless shelter for people with HIV, specifically for people with HIV. It's never been done anywhere else in the world, because we wanted to be able to, again, build that trust. The folks that we serve in our homeless shelter have not succeeded in other shelters because they have too many rules, because they're oftentimes targets of staff. So many homeless shelters are run by religious organizations, and some of them have certain feelings about people who are gay or about people who have HIV and the reason that they have it, or they have behaviors such as mental illness and chemical dependency that kept them from being successful. So by opening our doors to them and being able to give them a safe place to sleep, we are then able to build trust and get them to the place where we can get them started on psychiatric medications, we can get them started on HIV medications. We opened up a housing program, so we're actually able to now build skills and place people into permanent housing. And we're really excited about this because we all hear about the struggles of homelessness in our community, and here we're able to actually make very small, concrete steps with people and to get them housed and to get them healthy. Making sure people with HIV are on meds is important for the individual, and it's also important for the community. Because the only way that our region is going to be free of HIV, whether or not you or the people you love consider yourselves at risk for that, the only way we're going to be free of this is to make sure that people who have HIV are on medication and taking it correctly. So our work over these past couple years, culminating at the end of last year, opening up our homeless shelter, has been about making sure we can figure out what is the path to get people to actually get on meds. And first you have to get rid of the worries about where they're going to eat and where they're going to sleep. And once you are able to do that, we're able to get them on medications. Just a little personal story, a thing that shocked me, when we opened up our homeless shelter, I thought, all right, people are going to have a nice, safe place to live. And when we asked people, what was the bad things about other homeless shelters? And they said two things. One was that they smelled, so we made sure we don't smell. And that's a really big thing. I wouldn't want to sleep where it smelled. And they wanted privacy. So we actually set up privacy dividers so that even though you're sleeping in a room that might have 40 people in it, you actually aren't seeing a bunch of other people. And that was real important. And I thought, hey, we did a great thing. People are just going to want to come in and they're going to want to sleep and they're going to feel safe. But what I didn't take into account is that someone who has been homeless for 10 years has had to sleep in doorways, never fully resting because they are in danger. Homeless people are not a danger to us, the housed. More often than not, homeless people are the victims. And so they wouldn't be able to sleep throughout the night. So imagine spending a decade sleeping in doorways, never fully shutting your eyes. And when we opened up our homeless shelter, we saw many people who they would just sit in the lobby, even though they had a comfortable bed. And so our work became to build trust so that we'd slowly work to get them into that bed, to get them be able to have a full night's sleep. And so you try to remove the barriers of the thing that's keeping people from being successful. And that's the focus of what we do. Our inpatient program is still end of life, but it's changed somewhat. So half of the people we serve in our inpatient program still have HIV. Many of them didn't know they had HIV. Last summer, we admitted a 50-year-old police officer. Thought he was healthy, he was at work, and he just collapsed one day. And he had HIV. He was looked very robust and healthy, but he collapsed and found out that he had HIV and it actually infected his brain, and he died 2 months later. We also see people who knew they had HIV, but they live in communities where it's not safe to tell anyone that they have HIV. So in particular, people from Africa who moved to Seattle, and women in particular, because women are blamed for the problem many times, even though they didn't bring HIV into the home. And so they don't take medications because they don't want anyone to know, and then they still get too sick and die. The other half of our work is with people who other places will not care for, and it sort of goes back to why we were created. We were created because people wouldn't care for people with AIDS, but it's people with ALS. Other places won't care for people with ALS because the work is too hard. And or Huntington's disease, which is another neurological condition that runs through families. Just last week, we had a young man. He was in his early 40s who died of Huntington's disease. And 2 years ago, his brother died at Bailey Boucher House of Huntington's disease because it runs in families. So if you have a parent who has Huntington's disease, you have 50% likely to get Huntington's. And so this work is similar to the work that we did early on with AIDS, where we're treating the family system also. Also, young people in their 20s or 30s with cancer come to Bailey Boucher House for end of life. And we look at this as this is something that we want to be individual to them. To whatever works for that particular person, we want that to be. Sometimes it's working with a woman who's a single mother who's dying and has children. So we want to be able to figure out what's important to that mother, because many times it's what's going to happen to her children after she dies. Or being able to make sure people have the ability to share life with the family, with people that they consider their family. One of the great, most amazing things that we do, because we have 150 volunteers who work there every week, is have these amazing food events like you're having here today. But we will have a food event such as the most recent one was where we had Italian night, and the volunteers, who are mostly young university students, all dressed in black pants and white shirts and had a napkin over their arm, and brought families in where they could share a meal with the person that they loved who was at end of life, because that was important. That's how we share with each other through that experience. So I just want to, again, thank you, and I just want to tell a couple of stories that are important to me that we've worked on just this past year. So there's this one client, I'll call him JR, and he was homeless, and he was homeless for 10 years. And he was afraid to be in care. He was afraid for anyone to know he had HIV. And the shelter and his doctor, he did sporadically see a doctor, but he would not take medications. His doctor, whenever he would see him, would try to get him to come to Bailey Boucher House, saying that you need this. There's food there for you. And he, over the past couple years, he would not accept that care. And the shelter was the thing that did it. And they said, you can get off the street. So last winter, he came into our shelter. He struggled. He was a vet, and he had PTSD, and it was hard for him to actually accept trust and accept help from people. And we were able to build that trust, the safe place to be, the food that was there, and we have a psychiatrist on staff, so he didn't have to go somewhere else and tell a bunch of other people his story. And we were able to help him with some of his psychiatric symptoms, which then helped him actually be able to get on HIV medications. Just last month, we were successful in actually finding him a place to live, because he now has a place to be, and he comes in weekly to the outpatient program. So that's the kind of lives that you're touching by helping us, and I just want to thank you for that. And as I said, I'm going to be around. If you have questions and you want to ask me specifics, I'm more happy to help. But it's an amazing organization, and I'm so happy to be here. So I want to hand it over to one of your own. I want to ask John to come on up here, and he's going to tell a personal story of someone he loved at Bailey Boucher House. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everybody. So, when we got the email that Bailey Boucher House was going to be our organization this year, it hit a little close to home. My best friend, who I think we're going to have a photo of him in just a minute or two, his name was Harold. And Harold I met in the late 80s. Seattle was an awesome place to grow up in the 80s. You were able to go out dancing if you were 16, 17 until 4 in the morning. And that's exactly what me and my friend did. But Harold was an unusual guy, and he was a character for sure. There we are. It's definitely the 80s. 80s, my favorite decade, because it was like the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s kind of all threw up, and that's what our fashion became, a little bit of our music selection, the big hair that has gone away, but often what I did, I would sign us up for these free portraits at either Sears or JCPenney, and we would win, our free 5x7. I do all the styling for us. I did hair and makeup as well, as you can see. But that's what we did. And we were just buds. We traveled together. We went to San Francisco on spring break. We took the Amtrak from Seattle, and we just really enjoyed ourselves as buds. My first job was, as soon as I hit 16, I wanted a job. So first job was at Mrs. Fields Cookies. I then met my friend Harold, who had just moved from Yakima, because it was pretty common back in those days. Folks from Eastern Washington fled to Seattle, especially if you were a gay man. And Harold left right when he turned 18. For one thing, he was the son of a Baptist preacher, and that didn't go over so well. Like many people that ended up at Bailey Boucher, their families often weren't there for them. And so Harold came here, and we hit it off. And had our first job at Mrs. Fields Cookies. He became my supervisor. He was a few years older than me, and I wasn't too keen on that because I got him the job there, but I wasn't old enough to operate the cookie mixer. So he became my supervisor, but we loved that job. We worked hard at it. As soon as we closed the mall, we would head out, do dance until 4 in the morning, then kind of start the routine all over again. Then we had to grow up a little bit, and we each got our real jobs. Harold got a job at the Puget Sound Blood Center, and he succeeded at that job. Again, I just kind of, a few years younger than him, I let him lead the way, and I kind of watched what he did. One job we had together after our days at Mrs. Fields is we were also weekend DJs at a roller skating rink in Centralia, Washington. We were a hit with the 13-year-old girls. I can tell. They loved when Harold and John kind of came because we spun all those 80 records that they had no idea what we were doing. But so after that, we went our own ways. And we each got our jobs. I started Sanmar in 1995, so this January will be my 25 years with Sanmar. And I know I'm amazing company, and I'm just, time flies, but I love that. And Harold was with when I got that job. He was really proud of me that I got it. And the day came where he had to tell me he was HIV positive. I don't remember that day, quite honestly, I don't. But I do remember the day that he said he was going to retire. And I didn't get that. He wasn't even 30 yet. I was 25. But he knew what was ahead of him. And he went through it with courage. He just knew what his destiny was, and he wasn't afraid what was on the other side. So we prepared for that. I saw his health fade as time went on. His family was not there to support him. Oftentimes when he was at Bailey, his father made promises to come and see him, but they never came. And that was hard. But what I know is what Bailey did for him, and did for me as a friend. It always gave me just the warmth to know that there was someone there for him that showed him compassion and gave him the respect and dignity. And that's what they did. I had dozens of friends that died in the 90s. The 90s, bad fashion, bad music, just everything the 80s wasn't. But Bailey was a bit of light in Seattle for it was dark times, and lost a lot of friends. But again, what Bailey was there, they were not doing anywhere else in the country. And they let him be himself and have those moments. So that will always kind of be close to me. So today, I'm wearing Harold's little sweatshirt. This is my canvas for good. Come up to me later. I have a photo of us when he's wearing it. We're getting off the boat at Alcatraz down in San Francisco on one of our spring breaks, and smiling ear to ear. But I miss that guy, and I want to ask all of you to just give it your all. This is an amazing organization that we are supporting. I'm going to kick it off in, because we're here to raise money, I believe, and I hope we raise a lot of it. I hope we meet our goal and above. I have faith in all of you. I think we will. But I want to just make my personal donation in Harold's name for $500, and let's get this started. And with that said, Jeremy, so thank you all.
John, thank you for sharing that story. I hope you guys are inspired, as I am, to kick this off. Bailey is an amazing place. It's truly changing lives, and you guys and the work that we can do over the next couple weeks make a real difference. So thank you guys very much. There are food trucks and the ability to donate. Your donations all go to Bailey and to start this off. So please make your donations today. Enjoy the food trucks, and let's have an awesome time. And like John said, let's raise a lot of money. So thank you guys very, very much.